Okay, let's dive into a real historical mystery. We're talking about a puzzle that's been around for, 1400 years? It sits right at the intersection of two of the world's most influential books, the Quran and the Gospel. And believe it or not, it all comes down to what seems like a single, missing book.
So here's the core of the problem. The Qur'an talks about one gospel, the Injeel, which was revealed to Jesus. But then you look at the Christian tradition and, well, there are four of them: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So where's the one the Qur'an is talking about? For a lot of people, the answer has always seemed pretty straightforward. It must be a book that's been lost to history.
But what if we're asking the wrong question altogether? I mean, what if we've been searching for a lost book when we should have been listening for a preserved message? If you think about it that way, well, it changes everything.
So this really gives us two competing ideas to work with. On one hand, you've got the lost book theory, that the Injeel was a real physical text that's just gone. But then there's this other idea, the preserved message theory. This one suggests the Injeel isn't a book in the way we think of it. Instead, it's the core message of Jesus, his teachings, his parables, and the really interesting part, it might still be right there, hiding in plain sight within the four Gospels we've had all along.
And there's a huge linguistic clue right at the heart of all this. The word gospel itself comes from the Greek euangelion, and it literally just means good news or a proclamation. Think about it. It's the message being shared, not necessarily a written biography. You see this all over the New Testament. When the Apostle Paul talks about the gospel, and he does like 60 times, he almost always means the message he's preaching, not a physical book. It seems the Quran is actually tapping into that original core meaning.
So here's the key takeaway from that. We shouldn't be hunting for exact, word-for-word quotes. I mean, think of the journey. A message spoken in Aramaic, written down in Greek, and then referenced in Arabic centuries later. A literal copy-paste just isn't realistic. Instead, what we should be looking for are echoes. Echoes of meaning, of themes, of structure. Parallels that show one text is deeply, profoundly aware of the other's core message.
And once you start listening for those echoes, wow, the connections start to pop up, and they're surprisingly clear. So let's do it. Let's put these two scriptures side by side and see what we find.
Okay, let's start with this verse from the Quran. And get this, it explicitly says it's describing something found in the Gospel. It talks about a plant that sprouts, grows strong, and makes the sower happy. Now, if you're at all familiar with the Christian Gospels, that imagery should be setting off some major bells.
Because, boom, there it is, right in the Gospel of Mark. It's the famous parable of the mustard seed. The one where the tiniest little seed grows up to become this huge plant. The parallel here isn't just a stretch, it's undeniable.
And this is what makes it so cool. The Quran isn't just cutting and pasting the parable, it's revoicing it. It's taking that core teaching from Jesus about the growth of God's kingdom and applying it to a whole new context, the community of early Muslims. That's not just a casual reference, that's a really deep, sophisticated engagement with the original message.
Let's look at another one. This is a classic. Both texts use the exact same, really vivid image, a camel trying to get through the eye of a needle. It's their way of describing something impossible. But here's where it gets really fascinating. The original Semitic word for this is a bit ambiguous. In Syriac, which is a related language, that same root word can mean camel or thick rope. And guess what? Some classical Arabic interpretations of the Quran also allow for that thick rope reading. It just goes to show how connected these texts are, living in the same linguistic and conceptual world.
Okay, so we've seen shared parables and shared imagery, but the connections go even deeper than that. And honestly, this next one might be the most compelling piece of evidence of all. We're not just talking about a single verse here. We're talking about an entire chapter in the Quran that seems to follow the exact thematic and logical sequence of a really famous chapter in the Gospel of Matthew.
All right, let's walk through this step by step. In Matthew 25, Jesus starts with the parable of the 10 virgins. It's all about light and a closed door. Now look at Quran 57. It describes a scene on the Day of Judgment with believers who have light separated from hypocrites by a barrier with a gate, a closed door. See the parallel? Okay, next. Matthew moves on to the parable of the talents, which is all about wealth that's been entrusted to servants. And what does Quran 57 do right after its closed door scene? It urges believers to donate from the wealth God has entrusted to them. Then, Matthew's parable talks about multiplying the gift and getting a reward. The Quran follows up by talking about giving a goodly loan to God that will be multiplied back to you as a reward. And finally, both chapters wrap up with the same idea of sovereign redistribution. In Matthew, the master takes the lazy servant's talent and gives it to someone else. In the Qur'an, God gives his bounty to whomever he wills. It's the same exact logical flow, point for point.
Okay, so any good theory needs to be able to stand up to some tough questions, right? So let's play devil's advocate for a minute. Let's look at the biggest counter-arguments and see how this preserved message idea really holds up.
And here's the big one, the most obvious objection you could make. Okay, but aren't these just coincidences? I mean, it's a fair question. Are we just forcing patterns that aren't really there? Cherry-picking a few verses that happen to sound alike?
Well, the evidence suggests it's way more than just coincidence, and there are a few key reasons why. First, you've got the sequencing. Random overlaps just don't happen in a perfect four-step logical sequence like we saw between the Quran and Matthew. That's a huge tell. Second is the density. We've only scratched the surface here, but there are tons of these echoes. The sheer number of them points to a deliberate pattern, not just random chance. Third, there's the precision. Think about that camel and the needle's eye thing, with the shared linguistic weirdness. That shows a level of awareness that's way too specific to be an accident. And finally, you have context. We know from other historical sources, like a letter from the Prophet Muhammad to the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, that he would use language about tenants that directly calls back to Jesus' parables. He was choosing the perfect argument for the person he was talking to.
So, let's step back for a second. If we go with this idea that the Injeel is this preserved message of Jesus found inside the Gospels, what's the big deal? What does that actually change? Well, it gives us a completely new lens for understanding the relationship between these two massive traditions.
For starters, it helps solve a couple of old, thorny problems. First, there's the argument that the Quran just doesn't know what's in the Christian Gospels. But the evidence we've seen, especially that structural parallel, suggests the exact opposite, a really deep and sophisticated awareness. The second problem it solves is this idea that if the Quran confirms the Gospel, then Muslims have to accept the entire modern Bible word for word. This new view offers a much more elegant solution. It suggests the Quran is confirming the original revelation inside the Gospels while also setting itself up as the final standard to help figure out what that original message was.
And that kind of brings us full circle. We started this whole journey looking for a lost book, right? But maybe what we found is something even more profound, the incredible survival of a message. It suggests that the good news that Jesus spoke in Aramaic could echo down through the centuries, cross language barriers, and be revoiced in Arabic, with its core meaning and even its structure still intact. So I'll just leave you with this question. If a message can do that, if it can echo so clearly across all that time and space, what does that tell you about the power of an idea?